Perhaps the most tumultuous offseason in all of college basketball, amid coaching changes and eligibility chaos, the Wofford Team Preview starts now. Okay, I don't even know where to start with the Wofford Team Preview, and knowing that they're coming off of, obviously, the Southern Conference Tournament Championship as a 6th seed. The stories were going crazy just in terms of how they were able to do that. You're talking about getting hot at the right time. Man. And then the offseason and right before the season, Darren, I mean, what in the world happened at Wofford? I mean, there's so many innuendos, so many stories there. Dwight Perry, we know, is no longer the head coach. Kevin Giltner now takes over, a Wofford alum, a guy who's being, mentored by Mike Young as he was on the staff there at Virginia Tech. But this is uncharted territory to begin a season.
I don't know if I've seen anything like it. I mean, in my lifetime of the just craziness of how this all came to be, and with the quickness that it started and ended with. Between everything kind of coming to light to hiring Coach Giltner. I mean, it's unprecedented.
It is. And I just look at it from a perspective as far as you're talking about a roller coaster ride. You win the Southern Conference Tournament Championship against Furman. You're one of your, if not the most hated rival there in the Southern Conference between the two schools. And you do it in dramatic fashion, getting hot at the right time. And we talked about it several times, that can you have put together 3 or 4 games in a season at the end of the season, the postseason, to make that run, and Wofford's able to do it. And now, even without the coaching change that occurred, I mean, they were losing basically their entire roster. And so this is a complete roster overhaul, but it's not just about the players. It's about the coaching staff and everything that went down with the administration and the timeline. If you go back and look, it was all looking at were there some insubordination issues that were occurring with Dwight Perry and the staff. And again, there's a lot of he said, she said, and how that played out. And then the NCAA involved, or were they really involved in terms of eligibility issues with the current players that were there under Dwight Perry? And so there's so many question marks, even still, about exactly what transpired and what happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, obviously, it's pure speculation, but from somebody I had spoken with who, has an understanding of the compliance world, to your point of the NCAA involvement, at least what was on the surface was not even necessarily something that would always be self-reported.
That's right.
Because it's just kind of handled in-house, whoops.
Yeah, did the NCAA even need to be involved?
Yeah. So it's really interesting how all this played out, and, what the real story is. Who knows if we'll ever find out. I mean, it's an unfortunate situation for the program. It's an unfortunate situation for Coach Dwight Perry, who, frankly, I think did a good job leading that team last year. I thought they overachieved last season, clearly, by being a 5 seed and winning in the Southern Conference Tournament. But, I do think that kind of bringing one of their own back home, there is a certain level of comfort because of the institutional knowledge that he has.
I think that was the smart move to bring in Kevin Giltner there. Again, he's a guy that was beloved as a player there, and obviously what Mike Young brought to that program. And talking about a guy that's beloved, that's Mike Young, and now the head coach at Virginia Tech, and was able to parlay all of the success that he had there at Wofford into that job at Virginia Tech, and was grooming Kevin, for an opportunity. I just don't think they realized it was going to be at that moment and in that type of situation. But again, you look back at what Dwight Perry was able to do last year. I mean, it's a remarkable story just in itself, that you're 19-16 overall, 10-8 in the regular season in the SoCon. You finish 6th. But you get hot, as we talked about, at the right moment. You win the SoCon Tournament Championship, that improbable run. And it seemed like even that game against Furman there in the championship game, it was almost a microcosm of the season for Wofford, just in terms of the ebbs and the flows. And, they can put some pieces together throughout the season, just like they did during the game. They put some pieces together just to stay within reach.
Yep.
And I think that was the key thing for Wofford the entire season. You just couldn't push them down. And they might not have been able to hit that extreme high, but they did in the Southern Conference tournament because they stuck around.
They did, and that's a credit to the coaching staff and to those guys. I think some of that had to do. They had an older team. Right?
They did.
They certainly had an older team, and that helped. But as you mentioned, a very up and down season overall, especially in league. But as we talked about on the Furman preview, they just stuck around enough in that game, and when they really needed to throw a punch, they were able to throw a haymaker.
And Filowich was just one of those guys that, again, improbable, that you didn't think that he would be a guy that would have such an impact out on the court.
Absolutely.
But he did, and especially in that championship game. And we saw what he was able to do.
Absolutely. I mean, who would have thought that he, of all people, would have a chase down, pin the ball against the backboard block that leads to a transition three late in the game that takes kind of the cap off the can for Wofford. I mean, it was improbable, and a guy that for whatever reason seemed to give Furman fits every time that they played. It was
just his style of play, just all of that, and more of the story for Filowich was his free throw shooting and granny style, and going back to the Rick Barry days, and actually having Rick Barry help him to be able to utilize that type of technique, the underhand shot there. So it was not something that you saw coming in terms of how impactful he was going to be, other than I think coaches in the Southern Conference that knew of Filowich's capabilities, knew that he could be a guy that he would be a thorn in your side, and somehow came up with plays throughout a course of a game.
He certainly would. He played hard. I think he had a different style of physicality that was not necessarily common in the league from a big man perspective. Frankly, not overly athletic like some of the big men in the league, but just had the right amount of skill to be able to get shots off against more athletic, bigger players, and played hard enough where he was just gonna, like you said, he was a perfect example of a thorn in your side.
Yeah, and one of those guys you didn't want to play against.
No.
Because he could frustrate you to the nth degree and get you off your game just based on how his style of play was.
I can tell you, for sitting on the Furman bench for 2 years, there were multiple times where I wanted to get off that bench and just go challenge him.
Go tackle him. Right?
Because he was so frustrating, but he was one of those guys you wanted on your team because he found a way.
Oh, yeah, that's right. All right, and so when you look at what we talked about, a transfer overhaul, I should say a roster overhaul with transfers coming in, but it was all predicated because you lose 5 starters and top 6 scorers departed there. It was Civils, Tripp, Filowich, Arrington, you got Bailey and Lorenz, all those guys. So you're seeing just a loss of veteran leadership, scoring, rebounding, and even on the defensive side, a complete loss of everything that you had from a production standpoint for Wofford.
Yeah, it's funny. I put in my notes here, everybody in all caps of who they lost.
Exactly.
They have 2 guys that are coming back that played meaningful minutes on their roster last year, and frankly, to call them meaningful minutes is probably a little bit of a stretch. And that's no offense to them. They were just waiting their turn behind guys that, frankly were more senior and better at the time. But they've got an entire new roster. And as we talked about earlier, man, you throw in that new roster plus a new head coach and a new system. And by the way, that happened in the middle of September.
Yeah.
Wow. You've got yourself a recipe for an uphill battle.
Oh, you definitely do. And just think about it from a perspective as far as how college basketball has changed over the years, and especially when you're looking at it from a practice standpoint, because I coached in the days where you didn't start practice until October 15th.
Yep.
You had Midnight Madness, and that was the kickoff for the college basketball season. Now, yes, you could do some preconditioning or preseason conditioning, but you couldn't do anything basketball related whatsoever until October 15th. Now you do have that ability to try to put some things, implement some things from your offense, defensive philosophies, implement those during the course of the summer and leading into fall. But again, you're still limited, and again, it can't be true organized basketball activities. I get all of that. And so at least you had a little bit of that going on. And so you're thinking that even with the roster overhaul, that you're starting, to be able to build, into the upcoming season. And then you have the coaching change. And even some of these players, they didn't even know if they were going to be eligible or not. So all of that work is completely just shot now. It's over. And so you're talking about completely rebooting and restarting here right before the season starts. I mean, this is putting Coach Giltner and that staff in a very difficult situation. And it's hard for us to even really understand what this team is capable of. Now, we'll go through some of the pieces that we think are going to be able to contribute with the transfers coming in, but this is a scenario that it's even hard to understand what their ceiling, what their floor might be.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a couple points that you make that I think are really good is your point about building earlier and being able to have a little bit more continuity earlier because you can practice. That is a key piece of how programs are run today for our viewers and listeners out there. Historically, like you said, you couldn't start your practice until the middle of October, and so you weren't able to install offense and defensive schemes and philosophies until then. Now, most programs are doing that over the summer.
Yeah.
So when you get to September, you've already got a pretty good idea of what philosophies and what you want to run offensively and defensively. You've put that in. But the flip of that I guess the first thing, is that you now are able to build that chemistry. The flip of that is you throw that on your head schematically in mid-September.
Yeah.
And how much does that take away from a chemistry perspective? Because maybe a guy that was going to initially be a focal point in your offense, maybe now has to take a back seat, or maybe his style of play doesn't fit how Coach Giltner wants to run his offense, which I would imagine will be a similar motion style offense that Coach Young ran and runs.
No doubt about it. Yes,
But
you would expect that would be something that Giltner's going to be able to implement there with this team, regardless of who's going to be on the roster. But you're losing some guys. Again, we talked about the veteran leadership, Civils and Tripp. And I know we spent a lot of time with Filowich, but I think Corey Tripp and Civils, I think those guys, from a backcourt perspective, you're talking about two veteran guys that seem to fit that mold there at Wofford and were key pieces why Wofford was able to be the first number 6 seed to win the SoCon Tournament Championship.
They certainly were. And I don't know too much about Corey Tripp other than seeing him on the floor, but he strikes me as a pretty level-headed guy that was a really good piece in the locker room. And so, losing that leadership, a guy that had been there for 4 years, he'd played his entire career, leading that team, kind of handling, initiating the offense, kind of the head of that snake, that in itself is a big loss. So it is going to be interesting to see how a new leadership kind of forms and how that's going to be when all this is thrown together.
That's right. Well, we know some of the players coming back for certain. Luke Flynn, obviously part of the team last year, and Kamari Holmes, but they averaged just over 4 points per game. So again, not a whole lot of minutes, not a whole lot of production, not a whole lot of experience from that standpoint. But I think Holmes is a strong defender. I think he can be one of those guys that you're going to lean on initially there, and even a Luke Flynn. I mean, again, because these are guys that are very familiar with the program, regardless of if it's Coach Giltner or if it's Coach Perry. I'm just saying that they're familiar with Wofford, familiar with playing in the Southern Conference. And then Cannon Richards, again, saw limited action, but at least he's a piece that is going to be there from from that stability standpoint.
Correct. And I think We talked a little bit about it before, but we certainly can't underestimate the institutional knowledge that Coach Giltner has with that program and university. And so I think that combined with the guys that you just mentioned, it does give them a core of, okay, hey, we have enough institutional knowledge here that we can build, and we can take some guys under our wing and kind of help make the transition a little bit smoother and quicker.
And some of the transfers coming in. Niels Mahovsky from Central Florida, shooter, 37% from beyond the arc there from UCF, and he played well in the college basketball crown tourney, so I think there's some upside there. You've got Caden Vasco, Central Michigan, 6'6" wing, 7 points per game, 39% from beyond the arc, and then Brendan Rigsby, a D2 star. Again, some of these teams in the Southern Conference can go out and get some of these Division II guys that have been right on the cusp, but they've been able to see how they were able to make that transition and play high-level Division II. I mean, this is a guy, Brendan Rigsby, he averaged 17 points per game. Now, that was in the 23 season, had some injuries, things of that nature, but this is a guy who can light it up.
Certainly. And I think you kind of highlighted it here, the difference between high-level Division II and mid-major Division I, it's not as large a gap as you would think. So the guys that have proven that they can get it done at a high level at the Division II level should be able to come in to the Southern Conference and be successful.
Yeah, Rex Sterling, also a JUCO star from Williston State, 18 points per game, 10 rebounds per game.
Yeah.
Led JUCO in offensive rebounding. So that is a big piece right there that hopefully can translate here in the Southern Conference for Wofford. And then Alessandro Parati, a skilled 6'10", big Italian type of guy here, 17.5 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, and over 2 blocks per game. So can you have some front court size there?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued. I mean, I think that each of those guys you mentioned brings something unique to the table, but I think I'm really curious to see this front court with Sterling and Parati, and then Caden Vasco. The MAC is a very good league.
Yes.
It's a physical league, and Vasco looks like he's got legit size at 6'6", shot 39% from the three in a as we mentioned, a good league. And then with the size that Parati and Sterling have at 6'10" and 6'8", that is a formidable front court. We talk about Furman having a formidable front court. They're obviously a little bit more proven of a commodity, but this has a chance to be a very interesting front court here.
Yes, it definitely does. And then you look at some of the freshmen. I think this is a class that can have some potential here. I mean, you've got Chase Watley, a 3-time state champ, Jaden Tyler. He scored 19 points per game, 40% from the three. And then Max Ortega is a physical type of guard. And then you've got Brian Sumter coming in also. Yeah. He's a state player of the year, class AAA, 17 points per game. Almost 11 rebounds per game. So again, I think there's some opportunity. Again, it's how some of these freshmen can make that transition from high school, obviously, to Division I.
Certainly. The name that I think really intrigues me that you brought up, and some of it's because I know the program and I know how well he was coached, is Jaden Tyler, the freshman from Chicago. He won a state championship at Homewood Flossmoor High School. As you mentioned, averaged 19 a game. Chicago high school basketball, the league he played in, he was going up against talented players on a nightly basis, and he played for a college level coach. So I imagine he'll come in with a pretty strong basketball IQ. I'm intrigued to see if he can make a contribution as a freshman.
For certain. All right, when you look at now, new head coach Kevin Giltner coming in, we've talked about it. He played there. It was an assistant under Mike Young. But he's hired so late. Yeah. Again, I know we're overemphasizing this, but this is so significant just in terms of what he's up against. But there's no question he's going to lean on what he has learned under Mike Young, his philosophy, defense, rebounding, motion offense, valuing the three-pointer. Again, we've seen that from all of Mike Young's teams, all the way back to Fletcher McGee and how he could light it up in the Southern Conference. We know that. But again, it's the unprecedented nature of the firing of Dwight Perry and then the hiring of Kevin Giltner.
Yeah.
That's the biggest question mark coming into this, outside of you also lost nearly everything that you had from a production standpoint. So, I mean, you're getting it at both ends, so to speak, in terms of adversity in this situation.
No, you really are. And, I think if there's one shining light here, or trying to flip this into a positive with a new head coach coming in right now with a new roster, is that, yes, we did talk about a couple minutes ago, likely doing a bunch of install over the summer, but you're not having to transform a roster that was there last year. So I know that you didn't recruit those guys, but because they haven't played together for so long, because they really probably haven't fully learned what Coach Perry was going to put in, there is a positive that comes of this is, okay, well, we've got a brand new roster. We got a brand new coach. He can kind of start clean with a clean slate.
Of course, this is a clean slate for him, and there's a positive to that, but there also can be a negative to that. This empty canvas, so to speak. Now you look at schedule-wise in the non-conference. They start the season against George Mason. Then you've got a game at Auburn. In the ASUN SoCon Challenge, you have Bellarmine and North Florida. This would be an interesting game at Wichita State.
Yeah,
that's a good opportunity to see how you are. Wichita State, we know, I mean, they're consistently, one of the better teams. And then they start conference play on December the 31st at Western Carolina. So again, some of these New Year's Eve days in terms of getting some college basketball going. So again, some of those games can be tricky. All right, the big question though. All right, here for Wofford. Again, we've already said it, but we're going to say it again because Kevin Giltner was just hired just a few weeks before the season actually started, and all of the eligibility scare, who was even going to be there, because there was questions, were they even going to be able to field a team?
Yeah, because those kids could have left.
Yes, they could have left easily. So now can Kevin Giltner rapidly, what you said, install his system and mold a roster of basically newcomers, not only the transfers, but some of the freshmen? Can they contribute? And can they be a competitive unit capable of defending their title? That's a big question.
That's a massive question mark right there.
Yes.
I would anticipate it being a little bit of a slower start to the year, with trying to get comfortable with each other and get all the install in that they need. I find it hard to believe that they're going to come close to defending their championship this year. But I think there are, like we mentioned, there are some positives here that you can pull from this. And, if there was anybody that could come in and do this, I know it sounds like a broken record, but if there's anybody that could come in and do this, you're bringing back a guy that has about as much institutional knowledge of that program when it was at its absolute peak.
Yes.
And so I think if there's anybody that can, and it sounds like administration is behind him.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's all doom and gloom per se for the folks over at Wofford, but it's going to be an uphill battle for them for sure. I think in year one.
What's the floor?
I think the floor is 10th.
Yes.
I think
because there's so many unknowns in this situation. And again, I know Citadel winless in conference play last year, and the coaches voted Citadel 10th.
Yep.
9th here for Wofford. But there's no question. There's too many question marks in terms of how this team is going to be able to mesh together. And to your point, how fast can it happen? And even at all from that perspective. I would think the ceiling could be 10th here.
Yeah.
The floor could be 10th.
Yeah. And we can't emphasize enough, this is an unprecedented scenario. This does not happen often. And so,
I know there's something going on crazy at Wagner also right now, but still, this is crazy right here in our backyard in the Southern Conference.
What do you see as their ceiling?
I'm going to say 6th is their ceiling. And that's based on, can you have Sterling? Can you have Rigsby? Can you have Vasco? Can you have those guys immediately come together? And maybe not so much in the non-conference, because I think that's where you're going to learn about your team. You're going to feel things out. You're going to start trying to develop that camaraderie and also develop your rotation and, all of those things. But can you come end of January can you make a run
Yeah.
there and, get hot to a certain degree and start surprising some people? And, if you can do that, if these guys, can come together, and can you have one of the freshmen that can they emerge
Yep.
and be somewhat of that X factor, because that's what we don't know. And we've typically seen there's been a guy or two in the Southern Conference as a freshman
Absolutely
comes
there
in
is. Yep.
and surprises people. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. I didn't understand that he had that capability. And we've even seen it at Wofford
I was about to
previously.
say about 3 years ago.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, that was something that caught us all
Yes.
all by surprise.
That's right.
So no, I agree with you. I think 6 is their ceiling. I think it's going to be hard to get there.
Oh, I do too.
But
it will be hard.
But I do
Yes.
think that if these guys are, if they achieve what appears they have done on paper, to some of these guys at different levels, there does look like there's some talent there. And we talked about it earlier in the show. Yeah, do you want to put yourself in the best position possible to go into Asheville? Certainly.
Yeah.
But if you can get hot and click at the right moment, if there's enough talent there, all you need to do is be able to put it together for 3 days in Asheville.
Yeah, and Wofford has already done it.
They did it last year.
They did it as a 6th seed.
Yep.
So they showcased that it can be done. It was the first time a 6th seed has ever been able to win the conference tournament championship there in Asheville in the Southern Conference. So they have history, at least on their side. Although, again, it's a completely different team.
Yeah.
I get that. Completely different coaching staff, all of that. But, again, there's so many questions here. It's going to be hard pressed for them to get things pulled together. Because also you have to think about it in terms of, it'd be one thing if it were they're just in a vacuum.
Yeah.
But it's also, there's so many other good teams in the Southern Conference.
There are.
So the matchups that they're going to be going up against also dictates some of the success for Wofford as well, because that's the other side of this that you have to take into consideration.
That's a great point, right? And we'll see how that continuity, comes together. One thing we didn't mention too is he doesn't have his staff. Right?
That's right. Yes,
He
still pull all that together.
And I think he has some very talented guys on staff with him. And I think they will be, I think long term they will be successful.
Yes.
Because we focused a lot on the, how are they going to do this year? How is this coaching situation going to work out? I think it will be a positive in the long run for the program. But to your point, their ceiling, I do think, is a little bit predicated on how some of these other teams end up playing.
That's right.
Because there's just so many question marks here.
So many question marks. And, just thinking with all of those question marks, I would say, though, don't be surprised if for a few games they're a spoiler. They go out there and surprise people, and it's a team that they shouldn't beat, whatever it might be, because we see it consistently in the Southern Conference. That's what happens. I've seen it too many times that there will be one of those teams that rear its ugly head in terms of being a spoiler for somebody.
Certainly.
And Wofford, again, so many question marks we don't know, but we could see that. All right, that is the Wofford team preview episode. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcast, including the iHeartRadio app. Until next time, may all your jumpers hit nothing but the bottom of the net.